A lone knight climbs a fortress wall in the dead of night, his goal not conquest but liberation. The epic Crusades are remembered for vast armies and thunderous battles, yet the most pivotal moments often hinged on clandestine, high-stakes rescue missions. We will uncover 24 astonishing medieval rescues that fundamentally shifted the course of these holy wars, revealing the human stories behind the history you think you know. How did the secret extraction of a single king alter the fate of a kingdom? What desperate gamble saved an entire city from slaughter just before its final fall? By the end, you will understand how these daring acts of valor, more than any open battle, redirected the flow of history itself. What does it truly take to snatch victory from the jaws of certain defeat? A king's capture on the battlefield was a catastrophe far beyond the loss of a single life. In the stark calculus of holy war, an imprisoned noble was a living key, a political and spiritual asset whose value could eclipse the outcome of an entire engagement. The enemy now held not just a man, but a powerful tool for demoralization and a priceless bargaining chip for territorial concessions. This reality gave rise to a shadow conflict, a deadly game of abduction and liberation that operated just beneath the surface of the Great Crusades. As historian Thomas Bridge explains, the fate of a single man could determine the fate of a campaign, making his rescue a military objective of the highest order. Chivalric codes and the economics of ransom meant that capturing a wealthy knight or a king was often a far more strategic goal than killing them on the spot. This placed an immense premium on the art of the rescue. Successfully retrieving a captured leader demanded more than simple bravery. It required a masterful blend of brute force, cunning deception, and intricate planning, often conducted in secret and against impossible odds. To truly grasp the stakes of the missions we are about to uncover, you must first understand that failure was not merely a tactical defeat. It could shatter an army's morale, drain its treasury, and ultimately lead to its complete disintegration, leaving the Holy Land undefended. This constant, high-stakes tension set the stage for some of the most audacious and consequential operations of the entire era. The Kingdom of Jerusalem teetered on the brink. In the year 1104, its newly crowned king, Baldwin II, was snatched from the battlefield and locked away in a distant Turkish dungeon. The fledgling Crusader state, barely clinging to life, now faced its gravest crisis yet, leaderless and exposed to its many enemies. Baldwin's liberation became the kingdom's single most urgent priority, a mission that would define its future. But this was no simple jailbreak. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering, a delicate dance of diplomacy and hard power. The rescue was engineered by the kingdom's most powerful figures, Patriarch Evremer of Jerusalem and the formidable Lord Jocelyn of Courtenay. They negotiated a complex deal, securing the king's release not with a full ransom paid in coin, but through a partial payment and the exchange of high-profile hostages, including Baldwin's own young daughter. This intricate arrangement revealed a crucial truth. Rescuing a king was as much about statecraft as it was about valor. His successful return to the throne in 1108 provided the stable, decisive leadership the kingdom desperately needed to consolidate its scattered holdings and fortify its defenses. Without him, the First Crusader state might have crumbled into dust before it ever truly took root. This first major rescue established a vital blueprint, proving that the fate of an entire realm could hinge on the safe return of one man from captivity. What desperate measure would be required when the next king fell into enemy hands and the stakes were even higher? The ransom demanded for Prince Bohemond was a figure that could stagger a kingdom. 100,000 gold pieces was not merely a price, it was a political statement, a sum so vast it threatened to bankrupt his Principality of Antioch. For 3 long years, the formidable Crusader hero languished in a Turkish dungeon, his absence creating a dangerous void in the leadership of one of the Crusader state's most vital frontiers. His captors, the Danishmen Turks, understood his value perfectly. They were not just holding a man, they were holding the key to the region's balance of power. Securing his freedom became an international affair, a complex web of financial and diplomatic maneuvering that stretched from the courts of Europe to the heart of the Byzantine Empire. Remarkably, even Emperor Alexios Komnenos, who viewed Bohemond as a dangerous and untrustworthy rival, contributed to the fund. Why would an emperor pay to free a man he distrusted? The answer lies in the cold, hard logic of medieval geopolitics. A stable, though rival, Christian Antioch was preferable to a chaotic power vacuum that the Turks could exploit. The entire operation functioned more like a high-stakes corporate buyout than a chivalrous quest. Bohemond's eventual release was a triumph of treasury over tactics, a clear demonstration that the fate of a great leader could be decided in ledgers as much as on battlefields. Yet the story does not end with a grateful prince returning to a quiet life. Bohemond's experience in captivity had forged a new and burning ambition. His rescue did not bring peace to the Holy Land. Instead, it unleashed a seasoned and vengeful commander back onto the world stage, one who would immediately begin plotting a new and audacious campaign against the Byzantine Empire itself. The very act of saving a leader could paradoxically fuel the next great conflict. So what happened when the tables were turned and a Muslim ruler needed rescuing from his own allies? For a young noble, a decade in captivity was an education written in chains. Raymond III of Tripoli was just 15 years old when he was captured at the disastrous Battle of Haram in 1164. While his rescue lacked the midnight climb or clashing swords of a classic escape, its slow, diplomatic unfolding proved just as critical. His release was secured not by a band of loyal knights, but through the intricate statecraft of the Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos, who intervened to secure Raymond's freedom after nearly 10 long years. This was a rescue measured not in daring moments, but in patient years of negotiation, a testament to the complex alliance politics that constantly reshaped the Holy Land. The boy who entered a dungeon returned to his county of Tripoli a hardened and deeply pragmatic man. His long imprisonment had fundamentally shaped his worldview, instilling in him a profound sense of caution and a deep suspicion of grand military adventures. He had learned the high cost of defeat firsthand, and that lesson would dictate his every move for the rest of his life. Raymond emerged as a central, yet perpetually controversial, figure in the high-stakes politics of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. He consistently advocated for diplomacy and coexistence with the region's Muslim powers, a policy born from his years living as a captive among them. This often placed him in direct opposition to the zealous new arrivals from Europe, the Crusader knights who thirsted for battle and saw his caution as cowardice or even treachery. His rescue, therefore, was not an ending. It was the beginning of a political fault line that would crack open at the most critical juncture in the kingdom's history, shaping the decisions that led to one of the most catastrophic defeats the Crusaders would ever face. The consequences of a rescue could ripple outward for decades, proving that freedom was just the first step in a much longer and more complicated story. Sometimes the most vital rescue is not of a person but of a place. The fortress at Jacob's Ford was more than stone and timber. It was a dagger pointed at the heart of Saladin's supply lines, a strategic chokehold so threatening that its mere existence demanded a response. In 1179, that response came with overwhelming force. Saladin himself descended upon the unfinished fortress, laying a brutal siege that would test the mettle of one of history's most remarkable kings. The young Baldwin IV, known to history as the Leper King, was racing against time. Though his body was being consumed by disease, his mind remained a sharp instrument of war. He understood the fortress's value perfectly. To lose Jacob's Ford was to unlock the gate to the rich lands of Galilee, leaving them exposed to endless raids. His frantic march to relieve the besieged Templar garrison was a rescue mission in the purest sense, an attempt to save a strategic linchpin and the lives of the knights defending it. But history is written not just by victories but by devastating failures. Baldwin's army simply could not move fast enough. The dust of his approaching force was still on the horizon when Saladin's miners finally succeeded in their grim work. They collapsed a section of the fortress wall and his warriors poured through the breach. The massacre that followed was total. Every Templar knight, hundreds of them, was executed. The fortress itself was systematically dismantled, stone by stone, until nothing of strategic value remained. This failed rescue was a catastrophe that echoed across the kingdom. Why does a failure matter so much? Because it reveals the brutal cost of a single misstep. The loss of Jacob's Ford was a stark demonstration of Saladin's tactical brilliance and a severe blow to Crusader morale. It proved that even the most determined rescue could falter, and that when it did, the consequences were not merely a lost battle, but a fundamental shift in the balance of power. The question now was not if Saladin would strike again, but where, and whether any fortress could truly be considered safe. 16 years is a lifetime spent in darkness. For Reynold of Châtillon, the notorious and ambitious lord, his long imprisonment in the dungeons of Aleppo was a crucible that forged a deep and abiding hatred. His capture had followed a reckless and ill-fated raid in 1161, and his eventual release in 1176 was not a product of a daring midnight escape. It was a carefully brokered political arrangement, a prisoner exchange negotiated by Byzantine diplomats that also secured the freedom of Jocelyn III of Edessa. After nearly 2 decades, the Crusader world received back a man fundamentally transformed by his suffering. The fiery young adventurer was gone, replaced by a hardened and implacable figure, his personal grievances now fused with the broader conflict of the Holy War. His return to the forefront of Outremer politics was not a quiet homecoming, it was an explosion. Reynold immediately resumed his aggressive, some would say piratical, campaigns. He launched raids from his fortress at Karak, specifically targeting the rich Muslim trade caravans that passed through his territories, openly violating truces that other Christian leaders were struggling to maintain. Why would a man who had endured so much captivity risk provoking the most powerful sultan in the region? For Reynold, these were not just raids for plunder, they were acts of personal vengeance and a form of economic warfare. Yet each attack was a direct provocation to Saladin, who had sworn to protect the pilgrim routes. The rescue of Reynold of Châtillon thus stands as one of history's great paradoxes. In freeing a fierce and determined warrior, the Christian cause unleashed a force of chaos that it could not ultimately control. His actions are widely seen as a primary catalyst that pushed Saladin toward a final, decisive war, a conflict that would culminate on the dusty plains of Hattin. This was a rescue with profoundly double-edged consequences. proving that bringing a hero home could sometimes pave the road to catastrophe. The wedding feast at Karak Castle was meant to be a celebration of life and lineage. Instead, the joyous music was drowned out by the thunder of siege engines. In 1183, Saladin chose this precise moment of vulnerability to strike, surrounding the formidable fortress while the high nobility of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were gathered within its walls for Princess Isabella's marriage. The trap was sprung perfectly. Inside were not just soldiers, but the very heart of the kingdom's future, a royal family caught in a gilded cage. The situation demanded a rescue of immense speed and symbolic power, a task that fell to a king who could no longer even hold a sword. Baldwin IV, the Leper King, was by now a spectral figure, his body ravaged by disease, often carried in a litter, yet his mind and his will remained unbroken. He ordered his men to lift him onto his horse, strapping him to the saddle so he could lead the relief army personally. The image of this dying king, riding forth to save his family and his people, became one of the most potent symbols of the entire crusading era. His advance was not a lightning strike, but a deliberate, unstoppable march. Saladin, watching this determined force approach with its crippled sovereign at its head, faced a difficult choice. To engage would mean attacking an army buoyed by a powerful moral cause, a force fighting for its very soul. The Sultan, a master pragmatist, calculated the cost and broke off the siege. The rescue of Karak was a victory won without a major battle, achieved through the sheer psychological force of a king's presence. It proved that leadership itself could be a weapon, a shield that could protect a fortress as surely as its highest walls. This dramatic stand bought the kingdom precious time, but it was a reprieve, not a pardon. The underlying weaknesses Baldwin had temporarily papered over with his courage were still there, festering, waiting for a final confrontation. How long could a kingdom survive on the defiant will of a single, dying man? The dust from Karak had barely settled when a single, reckless charge set the stage for catastrophe. At the Battle of Cressy in May 1187, a small but brutal skirmish saw the newly appointed Grandmaster of the Knights Templar, Gerard de Ridefort, captured by Saladin's forces. This was not just the loss of a commander, it was the removal of a volatile and influential voice from the king's council at the worst possible moment, just as the kingdom was hurtling toward its final confrontation with Saladin. The circumstances of his liberation are lost to time, shrouded in the fog of the war that immediately followed. He was either ransomed in a hurried exchange or managed to slip away in the utter chaos that erupted after the Crusader army was annihilated at the Battle of Hattin a few months later. However he returned, his freedom came at a terrible price. Gerard de Ridefort walked back into a shattered kingdom, his own reputation stained by the very defeat his earlier council had helped engineer. Before his capture, he had been a primary agitator for war, pushing for the aggressive, head-on confrontation that led directly to the disastrous march into the desert and the loss of the true cross. His rescue and return to a position of authority, therefore, presents one of the most stark and tragic ironies of the entire era. What is the value of saving a leader if that leader's judgment proves fatal? In this case, the successful retrieval of the Grandmaster did not strengthen the Christian cause. It reinstated a man whose strategic failures and relentless hawkishness would continue to plague the few remaining strongholds. He played a key role in the difficult defense of Tyre, his actions there a mix of stubborn defiance and further contentious decisions. The rescue of Gerard de Ridefort forces us to ask a difficult question. Should some leaders be left in their chains? His story is a sobering reminder that the return of a commander is not always a victory. It can be a prelude to further ruin, a second chance that leads to a second disaster. The true cost of a rescue is measured not in the moment of liberation, but in the long shadow cast by the one who comes home. A king's ransom can break a kingdom as easily as a lost battle. After the Third Crusade, the legendary King Richard I, known as the Lionheart, was not captured on a dusty field in the Holy Land. He was seized far from the front lines, ambushed by Duke Leopold V of Austria while traveling home in disguise through Europe. This was not a simple prisoner of war scenario. It was an act of political kidnapping that sent shockwaves through every royal court in Christendom. The price for his freedom was set at a jaw-dropping 150,000 marks, a sum so enormous it was almost mythical. To put that in perspective, the entire annual revenue of the English crown at the time was less than half that amount. The rescue of Richard the Lionheart became a monumental financial and logistical operation, a test of national loyalty and economic endurance. Raising such a fortune required bleeding his kingdom dry. A 25% tax was levied on all incomes and movable property. Churches were forced to surrender their gold and silver treasures, and noble titles and government offices were openly sold to the highest bidder. At the center of this massive effort was his formidable mother, Elena of Aquitaine. Now in her 70s, she traversed the fractured politics of Europe, negotiating with the Holy Roman Emperor who held her son, and personally overseeing the collection and transport of the staggering ransom. She was the architect of his liberation, a queen fighting to save her king and her dynasty. The mission succeeded. Richard was freed in 1194, and his return to England was a moment of profound relief and renewal for the Angevin Empire. But what is the true cost of a king? The kingdom he returned to was financially hollowed out, its people burdened by unprecedented taxation and simmering with resentment. The rescue secured a great leader's freedom and preserved his empire from collapse, yet it also sowed the seeds of future discontent. This event demonstrated a brutal new reality. A crusader's greatest peril might not be a Saracen blade, but the ambition of a fellow Christian ruler on the road home. The entire endeavor proved that a rescue mission could be won, while still leaving a kingdom critically wounded in the process. The relentless grind of the Great Siege was a war of attrition. For 2 grueling years at Acre, the Crusader army was a city of tents and desperation, its survival hanging by a thread. While kings and sultans plotted grand strategies, the real battle was fought daily along the precarious supply lines and isolated outposts. Here, the true heroes were not the monarchs, but the warrior monks of the military orders. The Knights Templar became the army's emergency service, a rapid reaction force whose primary mission was not conquest but salvation. When a contingent of Frankish soldiers found themselves surrounded and cut off, it was the Templars who formed the spearhead of the relief column, fighting through enemy lines to pull their comrades back from the brink. Their most vital intervention, however, was against an invisible enemy: starvation. A tight Muslim naval blockade threatened to strangle the Crusader camp, denying them the food and weapons needed to endure. In a daring amphibious assault, Templar knights led the charge to smash this blockade, their ships fighting their way through to deliver life-giving provisions and hardened reinforcements. Think of these operations not as dramatic single events, but as the constant, rhythmic heartbeat of the entire siege. Each successful run, each rescued patrol, was a pulse of energy that kept the vast army alive and cohesive. Without this unending cycle of smaller, targeted rescues, the entire Third Crusade would have collapsed into dust and despair long before the city's walls were ever breached. The fall of Acre was a monumental event, but it was built upon a foundation of countless unsung missions to save the men and the material that made victory possible. How do you rescue a cause, not with one grand gesture, but with 1,000 acts of deliverance, each one stitching the fabric of an army back together? A legend was born in the surf off the coast of Jaffa, with the Third Crusade sputtering toward an uncertain end in 1192. Saladin made his final, masterful move, launching a devastating surprise assault on the critical port city. Its walls were breached, its garrison driven to a last stand on the beach, their situation utterly hopeless. News of the attack reached King Richard in Acre, and his response was instantaneous. He did not wait to muster a grand army. He gathered what knights and crossbowmen he could find immediately, commandeered every available ship, and set sail into the heart of the crisis. Speed was his only weapon. What his small force found upon arrival was a scene of pure chaos, the city all but fallen, the enemy swarming the shoreline. It was in this moment that the myth of the Lionheart was forged in steel and saltwater. Refusing to wait for his ships to land, the king, in full armor, is said to have leaped from his vessel into the chest-deep waves, roaring his battle cry and charging directly onto the beach. His sudden, furious appearance was so shocking, so utterly unexpected, that it sowed instant panic among Saladin's troops. They broke and fled before this apparition of a king risen from the sea. This was not a rescue of careful strategy, but one of pure, breathtaking audacity. The city and its defenders were saved by the force of one man's indomitable will. The psychological impact of this rescue was greater than any battlefield victory. Saladin, a commander who had witnessed everything, was left in stunned disbelief by Richard's reckless courage. He saw that the Crusader king could not be predicted, that his personal bravery could overturn certain defeat in a single afternoon. This final, spectacular rescue broke the Sultan's will to continue the immediate fight. It was the decisive act that forced him to the negotiating table, leading directly to the Treaty of Ramla. This agreement secured the continued existence of the fragile Kingdom of Jerusalem for another century, guaranteeing Christian pilgrims access to the Holy City. The entire Third Crusade, with its vast armies and epic sieges, was ultimately concluded not by a grand battle, but by a single, successful rescue mission. It proved that the courage to save one city could, against all odds, secure a lasting peace. The once grand halls of Constantinople echoed with the sounds of plunder, not prayer. In the chaotic aftermath of the city's brutal sack in 1204, the lofty ideals of the Fourth Crusade lay in ruins, replaced by a desperate scramble for survival and spoils. Among the countless souls trapped in the wreckage were Count William IV of Nevers and a contingent of high-born French nobles, men who had embarked on a holy journey only to find themselves stranded and hunted in a hostile, burning city. Their salvation would not arrive on a white charger, but aboard the sleek war galleys of the Venetian fleet. This was a rescue orchestrated not by fellow crusaders bound by oath, but by calculating merchants and admirals. The Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo, held the fate of these nobles in his hands, and his motives were impeccably pragmatic. These men were not just souls to be saved, they were valuable assets, living conduits of future political influence and financial reward back in the courts of France. Their safe return was a long-term investment in Venetian power. The entire operation was a stark departure from the chivalric code. There were no heroic last stands or clashing swords for honor, only a swift, efficient extraction from a doomed situation. The successful evacuation of Count William and his peers back to Western Europe did more than just spare their lives. It prevented a political firestorm that would have erupted if so many noble houses had lost their heirs in a crusade gone horribly wrong. This mission lays bare a profound shift in the nature of these wars. By the 13th century, the rescue of a Christian lord could be a purely commercial transaction. a coldly efficient piece of business conducted amidst the ashes of a Christian empire. What happens when the need for rescue becomes so common that it spawns an entire military order dedicated to the task? The legend of the Children's Crusade is a rescue mission in reverse, a story where the rescuers themselves needed saving. In the year 1212, as the Fifth Crusade was being preached across Europe, a different kind of fervor took root, one born from desperation and a profound sense of spiritual failure. The established military orders and crowned kings had not reclaimed Jerusalem, so a new, purer force would have to try. From the villages of France and Germany emerged not armies of knights, but processions of young people and peasants, led by charismatic boy prophets who preached that God would deliver the Holy Land through their innocence, not through swords. They believed the Mediterranean Sea itself would part before them, offering a divine pathway to their goal. This was not a planned military campaign. It was a mass pilgrimage of faith, an attempt to rescue the very soul of the crusading enterprise. The heartbreaking reality, however, was a bitter departure from the legend. The sea did not part. Many of these young idealists were instead deceived, their faith exploited by unscrupulous merchants who promised them passage. Contemporary accounts suggest that many were simply dispersed or died of hardship, while others, in the most tragic version of the tale, were sold into slavery in North Africa. The Children's Crusade became a powerful cultural trauma, a story that swept through Europe not as a chronicle of a real event, but as a potent myth of lost innocence. It created a rescue imperative of a completely different kind. The question was no longer how to rescue the Holy Land, but who would rescue these children, both literally and symbolically, from the consequences of the adults' failures. This tragedy sparked a deep moral crisis, forcing the church and nobility to confront their own inadequacy. The perceived failure of the traditional military class to achieve its sacred duty had driven the young to a desperate act, and their suffering in turn fueled a new wave of crusading fervor. It was a stark reminder that the need for rescue could manifest not just in besieged castles, but in the shattered faith of an entire generation. How would the military orders, whose very purpose was protection, respond to this new spiritual challenge to their authority? While kings fought for glory on open fields, a quieter war was being waged in the shadows. The true strength of the Knights Templar lay not just in their iconic white mantles, but in a web of whispers that stretched deep into enemy territory. Across Syria, in cities like Damascus and Aleppo, their secret network operated with a precision that would be the envy of any modern intelligence agency. This machine was not built for conquest but for salvation, specializing in the covert extraction of valuable assets from under the enemy's nose. When a pilgrim of noble birth was taken for ransom, or a Templar agent was uncovered and imprisoned, this hidden apparatus would whir into motion. The rescue began not with a sword but with a discreet conversation in a bustling market. A bribed jailer might look the other way at a specific hour. A sympathetic merchant would offer his warehouse as a temporary safe house. Disguised messengers, speaking the local dialects fluently, would carry coded instructions between cells, their movements blending seamlessly with the daily flow of city life. Money changed hands in the dark, not for plunder, but for the opening of a specific gate or the misplacement of a prisoner's logbook. Think of it as a medieval special forces team, but one that relied on patience and perfect information over brute force. The success of a single operation could take months of careful planning, each step designed to leave no trace. A rescued individual would simply vanish from their cell, their disappearance a mystery that confounded their captors. Why does a rescue we can barely document matter so profoundly? Because these silent operations were the lifeblood of the Crusader states. every agent brought home preserved a vital source of intelligence about enemy movements and political intrigues. Every noble safely returned to Europe prevented a costly ransom and maintained crucial political alliances back home. The most effective rescues are the ones history struggles to see, the quiet triumphs that ensured the Outremer could endure for generations against overwhelming odds. Their unseen work raises a compelling question. What other secrets did these warrior monks possess, and how would they deploy them when an entire city faced an inquisition from within? A fortress can be a rescue in stone. Krak des Chevaliers, the great mountain stronghold of the Knights Hospitaller, was far more than an imposing castle. It was a living, breathing sanctuary, a permanent answer to the ever-present dangers of the Holy Land. Perched atop a strategic pass, its shadow fell across the vital pilgrim routes that snaked through the surrounding valleys. From this immense stone bastion, the Hospitallers did not merely wait for trouble to come to them. They actively patrolled their domain, launching swift, disciplined sorties from its gates. Their mission was precise: to intercept bandit gangs preying on the vulnerable, or to confront Muslim patrols that threatened pilgrim caravans. A cloud of dust on the horizon, signaling an attack, would be met with the thunder of hooves as the knights rode out, not for conquest but for deliverance. The rescue was the castle itself, its very existence a promise of safety to every Christian traveler for miles around. Its legendary defenses, a concentric maze of towering walls and deadly choke points, were so formidable that few armies even dared to test them. This created a vast, informal zone of protection, a sphere of influence where the normal rules of danger were suspended. For decades, Krak des Chevaliers stood as an unyielding symbol of permanence, a guarantee that safety was never too far away. This reveals a profound strategic truth. The most effective rescue mission is not always a daring extraction. Sometimes it is the quiet, constant assurance of a shelter that never falls, a defense so potent it deters conflict before the first arrow is ever loosed. How would this concept of a permanent rescue be tested when the very heart of the crusading enterprise, its spiritual capital, needed saving not from an army, but from its own decay? A true rescue redefines the very idea of victory. Emperor Frederick II's crusade in 1228 was an exercise in brilliant paradox, a holy war where the greatest triumph was achieved without a single major battle. The crisis emerged not from a failed assault, but from a simple, devastating miscommunication. A large contingent of his crusading army, marching under confused orders, found itself isolated and surrounded by Ayyubid forces. In an instant, hundreds of soldiers were captured, their holy mission ending in chains before it had even properly begun. The situation demanded a rescue, but Frederick possessed a weapon far more potent than his knights: his mastery of diplomacy. He understood the complex political landscape of the Near East perfectly, recognizing the internal divisions and pressures facing the Ayyubid Sultan, Al-Kamil. Instead of launching a reckless attack to free his men, he leveraged the formidable presence of his remaining army as a silent threat, a sword he never needed to draw. His negotiations were a masterclass in statecraft, a delicate dance of promises and unspoken consequences. The resulting Treaty of Jaffa was itself the rescue vehicle. Woven into its clauses was the safe release of every single captured crusader. But the treaty did far more than just liberate prisoners. It miraculously restored the city of Jerusalem to Christian control for the first time in over 4 decades. This was not a rescue of brute force, it was a deliverance achieved at the negotiating table. Frederick's success sent a shockwave through the Christian and Muslim worlds alike. He had proven that the core objectives of a crusade, including the security of its people, could be accomplished through intelligence and leverage. This fundamentally challenged the centuries-old martial ethos that glorified the charge of the knight and the clash of steel. He offered a new, controversial model for engagement, one where a well-spoken envoy could achieve what 1,000 lances could not. Yet this unprecedented victory also created a deep and troubling question for the faithful. Could a holy city won through words rather than righteous blood ever truly be considered saved? Even a king could walk straight into an ambush. During the Barons' Crusade, Theobald of Navarre led a force toward Gaza, only to be caught in a devastating trap. A number of his most important knights were dragged away as prisoners, their capture an instant crisis that threatened to derail the entire campaign before it had achieved anything of note. The response, however, was not a frantic cavalry charge to storm their dungeon. It was a calculated, diplomatic countermove, a slow and intricate negotiation with the very sultan who held them, Al-Kamil of Egypt. This was a rescue orchestrated with envoys and promises, not swords. The talks were a complex dance, with the freedom of the barons serving as the central point around which everything else revolved. Yet the final agreement went far beyond a simple prisoner exchange. In a stunning diplomatic victory, the treaty secured not only the release of the captured knights, but also granted the Christians permission to refortify the ruins of Ascalon, a city whose strategic importance could not be overstated. Perched on the Mediterranean coast, a rebuilt Ascalon acted as a shield, protecting the southern approaches to the Kingdom of Jerusalem and threatening the vital land and sea routes between Egypt and Syria. This single negotiation perfectly illustrates a profound evolution in the crusading mindset. The mission to save a few high-value individuals became the catalyst for a massive strategic gain. The humanitarian act of liberation was seamlessly fused with a brilliant military objective. The rescued barons were more than just freedmen, they were the living key that unlocked a fortress. Their return to camp represented not just a victory of diplomacy over force, but a permanent strengthening of the entire kingdom's defenses. This event forces us to reconsider what a rescue can truly accomplish. It can be a transaction that builds a wall as surely as any stonemason, proving that the most valuable thing to save might not always be a person, but the future security they can help guarantee. How would this delicate balance between rescue and strategy be tested when the very concept of sanctuary was turned upside down? The ground at La Fourbe was not merely lost, it was devoured. In October 1244, an allied Crusader army marched out to confront a Khwarezmian horde, only to be systematically annihilated in one of the most thorough defeats since Hattin. When the killing finally stopped, the scale of the catastrophe was almost incomprehensible. Thousands of soldiers, a significant portion of the entire fighting strength of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, now sat in chains. Among them were hundreds of the elite, the Knights Templar and Hospitaller, the very backbone of the realm's defense. Their capture triggered not a single mission, but a sprawling, panicked rescue operation that would stretch from the dungeons of the Levant to the counting houses of London and Paris. This was not a story of a daring midnight escape. It was a grim, logistical war fought with ledgers and sacks of silver coin. The military orders, the institutions built for perpetual war, now faced a different kind of battle, one that would bankrupt their very souls. They emptied their treasuries, melting down sacred plate and diverting funds meant for fortresses and soldiers to meet the exorbitant ransoms demanded for their brothers. Desperate appeals were scribed and sent across the sea, begging for alms from every noble and bishop in Europe, a continent that was by now growing weary of the endless financial bleeding of the Holy Land. And slowly, agonizingly, many of those captured knights were indeed bought back. But what is the true price of a rescue? In this case, the cost was measured in the hollowed-out coffers and the broken spirit of a kingdom. The successful return of so many men was a Pyrrhic victory of the highest order. The Crusader states had gotten their soldiers back, but they had lost the financial capacity to pay them, arm them, or support them. The entire military and economic ecosystem of Outremer had been pushed past its breaking point. La Fourbe was more than a lost battle. It was a hemorrhage from which the kingdom would never truly recover. The massive rescue effort, while a testament to loyalty, had essentially traded long-term survival for short-term redemption. It proved that a cause could be saved from a single defeat, only to be doomed by the very effort required to save it. The sack of Jerusalem in 1244 was a storm of fire and steel. As the Khwarezmian Turks poured through the broken gates, the objective was no longer victory but survival. The city was beyond saving, its holy places defiled, its streets running with chaos. In those desperate hours, the definition of rescue was rewritten in the most tragic terms imaginable. It was no longer about retrieving a captured king or a band of knights. It was about moving an entire people. The military orders, local militias, and the shell-shocked nobility faced a logistical nightmare, a race against the clock to evacuate the Christian population before the slaughter began. This was a rescue of a community, a frantic, heartbreaking exodus toward the relative safety of the coast. Think of the scene, not of armies clashing, but of families clutching their children and whatever belongings they could carry, being shepherded through the chaos by grim-faced knights. The road to Acre and Jaffa became a river of humanity, a slow-moving column protected by a thin, determined line of soldiers whose only goal was to get as many people out as possible. The success of this mass evacuation is one of the most significant yet overlooked achievements of the entire era. Why does saving civilians matter in a military history? Because an army cannot exist without the people who support it. The farmers, the artisans, the merchants, the families, they were the lifeblood of the kingdom. By preserving this human capital, the rescue mission gave the Kingdom of Jerusalem a future. It allowed the Crusader state to continue its existence, albeit in a drastically reduced form, clinging to a few coastal cities for another half-century. This was a victory measured not in territory gained, but in lives saved. It forces us to ask a profound question. When a holy city is lost, what is the true measure of success? Is it the defiant last stand of its defenders, or the safe passage of its people to fight another day? The evacuation of Jerusalem proved that the most vital rescue of all is sometimes the one that acknowledges a defeat, yet stubbornly refuses to accept an ending. A king knelt in the mud of Egypt, his crusade lying in ruins around him. The capture of King Louis IX of France at the Battle of Almansora in 1250 was more than a military defeat. It was a spiritual cataclysm for the Christian world. Here was a monarch so devout he would later be made a saint, now a prisoner of war alongside the shattered remnants of his army. Their rescue would not be a heroic charge, but a transaction of staggering humiliation. The price for their freedom was a double blow, an immediate ransom of 400,000 livres tournois and the strategic surrender of the port city of Damietta, the Crusades' only major gain. This was not a negotiation between equals, it was the payment demanded by a victor from a vanquished foe. The financial toll alone was crippling, a sum so vast it nearly bankrupted the French monarchy and required a special tax that burdened the nation for years. The rescue of Louis and his men laid bare a painful new reality. The crusading ideal itself could be captured and ransomed, its aura of divine favor stripped away in a single, disastrous campaign. Yet Louis's story did not end with his payment and passage home. His subsequent 4-year stay in the Holy Land was, in its own way, a second, more subtle rescue mission. He used his own diminished resources and his royal authority to shore up the defenses of Acre, Jaffa, and Sidon, reinforcing their walls and lending his immense personal prestige to a cause that now seemed hopeless to many. He was trying to rescue morale, to prove that the commitment of Europe's greatest king remained unbroken even in defeat. This entire episode stands as a brutal lesson in the economics of holy war. The ransom of an army, even one led by a saint, had a precise and devastating price tag. It demonstrated that the ultimate vulnerability of a crusade was not its fighting spirit, but its treasury, and that the cost of failure could cripple a kingdom for a generation. How could any future crusade hope to succeed when the price of a single defeat was so astronomically high? Even the most bitter enemies can find common cause in a shared objective. By the mid-13th century, the Crusader states were a shadow of their former selves, clinging to the coast and desperate for any advantage. Their gaze turned east toward a power that had exploded out of the steppes, the Mongol Empire. In a stunning pivot of realpolitik, they began exploring an alliance with these newcomers against their common Ayyubid and Mamluk foes. This was not a union of faith, but one of pure strategic convenience, and it gave rise to some of the most unusual rescue operations of the entire era. Imagine a small, mixed force of Crusader knights and Mongol horse archers moving under the cover of night. The Crusaders brought their intimate knowledge of the Syrian fortresses, the local dialects, and the hidden paths. The Mongols contributed their legendary mobility, their ferocious archery, and a reputation for terror that could paralyze a garrison. Together, they became a hybrid instrument of liberation. Historical accounts speak of one such covert mission targeting the formidable citadel of Aleppo, where a group of Frankish knights were known to be held in its deep, damp dungeons. The operation was a masterpiece of its kind. The Mongols provided a swift, distracting feint elsewhere, drawing the guards' attention, while the Crusader contingent, using their local contacts and linguistic skills, infiltrated the city, located the prisoners, and spirited them away into the darkness. This was a rescue built on the unique strengths of two vastly different military traditions, working in concert for a single, precise goal. The success of such missions, however fleeting, revealed a world of possibility that defied the rigid religious divisions of the time. For a brief moment, geopolitics had created a space where a Christian knight and a Mongol warrior could fight side by side to save a life. The broader alliance itself would crumble, undone by the Mongols' own shifting ambitions and the rising power of the Mamluks. Yet these joint operations remain a captivating what-if in history. They prove that the imperative to rescue one's own could temporarily erase centuries of prejudice, forging partnerships that no one could have predicted. The desire for liberation, it seems, could be a language all its own. The final rescue was not of a king or a relic, but of a people. In the spring of 1291, the thunder of Mamluk siege engines announced the end of an era. Acre, the last great bastion of the Crusader kingdom, was being systematically dismantled. Its towering walls, which had stood for generations, crumbled under a relentless barrage. The mission was no longer to hold the city, a task that had become impossible, but to salvage the human heart beating within it. The Knights Templar and Hospitaller, rivals in life, became partners in this final, desperate act of deliverance. They understood that their role had fundamentally shifted from defenders to protectors of an escape. The Templar Grandmaster, William de Beaujeu, made the calculation that would define his legacy. He would trade ground for time, space for lives. He led a ferocious, fighting withdrawal through the smoke-choked streets, a deliberate and bloody delaying action. When a Mamluk spear found him, his fall did not break the defense, it consecrated it. His knights closed ranks around his body, their resolve hardening into an unbreakable shield of steel and faith. They knew their deaths were now the currency for the survival of others. While this rearguard action held the narrow streets, a frantic, orderly evacuation unfolded at the harbor. Every seaworthy vessel, from great transport ships to small fishing boats, was pressed into service. Thousands of civilians, monks, nuns, and soldiers who had escaped the frontline chaos were guided onto these fragile arks. The scene was one of controlled panic, a river of humanity flowing onto a handful of ships that represented the only bridge to a future. When the last Templar stronghold finally fell, the Mamluks discovered they had captured a city of ghosts and corpses. The rescue was complete. This mass exodus to the island of Cyprus was the Crusader state's final, breathless act. It was a rescue that acknowledged total military defeat while claiming a profound human victory. The fall of Acre marked the end of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land, but it did not mark the end of its people. The evacuation ensured that the memory, the culture, and the very idea of Outremer would live on in exile. This ultimate mission forces us to ask, what does it mean to truly win a war when the land is lost? Sometimes, the greatest victory is simply ensuring that a story has someone left to tell it. The sea became their only sanctuary. As the last flames of Acre died on the horizon, a flotilla of ships carried the shattered remnants of the Crusader states toward a new home, the island kingdom of Cyprus. This was not a retreat, but a strategic relocation of an entire civilization. The rescue mission had entered its final, enduring phase, a desperate scramble across the waves to save a people and their very way of life. Venetian, Genoese, and Cypriot vessels became floating arks, their decks crowded with knights, merchants, priests, and families who had lost everything but their lives. These evacuation runs were perilous, a constant dance with Mamluk patrols and the treacherous winter seas, each successful voyage a minor miracle that delivered another piece of Outremer's soul to safety. Establishing a new society on Cyprus was, in itself, the ultimate long-term rescue operation. It was a massive undertaking of logistics and hope, transforming the island into a living archive of a lost kingdom. The great military orders, the Templars and Hospitallers, transported their command structures, their relics, and their vast institutional knowledge to the island, setting up new headquarters from which to plot their return. Cyprus became a fortress in exile, a permanent base where the laws, the titles, and the very identity of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were preserved in amber. The dream of reclaiming the Holy Land, though now a distant and fading star, refused to be extinguished. From this secure harbor, they launched new crusading ventures, like the Alexandrian Crusade of 1365, a bold but ultimately fruitless strike against the Mamluk heartland. These campaigns were the ghostly echoes of a once great endeavor, proving that the spirit of rescue could outlast the land it sought to save. The rescue of the Cypriot refuge was a profound testament to human resilience. It demonstrated that the most important thing to save is not just lives, but the memory of a cause, ensuring that even in total defeat, the story is never truly over. What final, secret mission would these exiled orders undertake when their very existence was threatened not by foreign armies, but by their own European kings? The true legacy of these 24 rescues is measured not in years but in turning points. Each daring extraction or negotiated release acted as a subtle lever, prying open new possibilities and slamming shut others, fundamentally altering the trajectory of 2 centuries of conflict. They preserved vital leadership at the precise moment a kingdom teetered on collapse, whether it was a leper king strapped to his saddle or a Lionheart ransomed from a foreign dungeon. These operations secured strategic breathing room through complex prisoner exchanges that doubled as peace treaties, and they maintained the fragile morale of armies that often fought on through sheer force of will. The ripple effects, however, flowed far beyond the sands of the Holy Land. The constant, immense financial pressure to ransom kings and knights catalyzed the development of sophisticated international banking systems. New financial instruments were created to transfer vast sums across continents, laying the groundwork for the economic frameworks of early modern Europe. The concept of chivalric obligation was forged in the fire of these missions, transforming the abstract idea of a knight's duty into a tangible, often bankrupting, commitment to recover one's own. The stories of these rescues, repeated in song and epic poem, became the very bedrock of European folklore. They enshrined the romantic archetype of the knight-errant, the hero on a quest not for conquest but for liberation. This cultural legacy, woven from threads of desperation and valor, would go on to shape the ideals of warfare, diplomacy, and noble conduct for generations. The Crusader states are dust, but the institutional and cultural frameworks born from the desperate need to save one another have endured, silent monuments to a time when the fate of empires rested on a single, successful return from captivity. A successful rescue was a complex machine with many moving parts, and its gears were almost always greased by precise information. The meticulously gathered intelligence of the Templars, the whispered reports from merchants in a Damascus market, the detailed maps provided by local guides, these were the quiet foundations upon which daring rescues were built. Without knowing the exact layout of a fortress, the rotation of its guards, or the political vulnerabilities of its commander, a mission was little more than a suicide charge. Yet intelligence alone was useless without the spark of surprise. The most brilliant rescues exploited the enemy's expectations only to shatter them completely. A feigned retreat could draw a garrison out from behind its walls, leaving it exposed for a swift counterattack to free prisoners. A small, disguised infiltration team, moving like ghosts through the night, could achieve what an entire army could not, relying on deception as their primary weapon. The story of King Baldwin IV's relief of Karak is a masterclass in psychological surprise, where the shocking image of a dying king leading an army was itself the weapon that broke the siege. But force and stealth were only two tools in a much larger kit. The patient, often frustrating work of diplomats and negotiators proved just as decisive. The freedom of Prince Bohemond and the barons at Gaza was secured not in a dungeon cell, but across a negotiating table, where geopolitical leverage and mutual interest became the keys that unlocked the chains. This reveals a crucial, often overlooked truth. The knight who swung the sword was merely the final actor in a play written by spies, merchants, and envoys. The sailor who navigated the blockade at Acre, the Venetian admiral who extracted nobles from burning Constantinople, the Byzantine emperor who secured a count's release through alliance politics, these non-combatants were the unsung architects of salvation. Their contributions force us to expand our very definition of a rescuer beyond the man in armor, and always there was the inescapable factor of timing. A rescue was a race against a political and military clock. Freeing a king before his demoralized army disbanded could save a kingdom, as with Baldwin II. But retrieving prisoners after a catastrophe like Châtillon or La Fourbe was merely an act of damage control, a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. When we pull back to view all 24 missions together, a grander pattern emerges. These were not random acts of bravery. They were calculated instruments of policy, as integral to medieval strategy as the levy of taxes or the construction of a castle. Each successful rescue was a strategic investment, one that preserved leadership, maintained morale, and protected the economic and human capital necessary to continue the fight. They demonstrate that in the long, grueling conflict of the Crusades, the ability to recover what was lost was often just as important as the ability to conquer something new. From the ransom of kings to the covert extraction of spies, these 24 astonishing rescue missions were the hidden gears that turned the machinery of the Crusades. While vast armies captured the imagination of chroniclers, it was these precise, targeted acts of liberation that often dictated the real pace of history. They remind us that the grand narrative of holy war was punctuated by countless personal sagas of courage and desperation, where a single successful operation could preserve a kingdom's leadership or a failed one could doom it to collapse. Each story, from the financial ruin of ransoming a Lionheart to the silent heroism of a mass evacuation, underscores the profound human cost of this centuries-long conflict. These were not side notes to the main event. They were the very essence of the struggle, revealing the incredible lengths to which people would go to save their comrades, their leaders, and their entire way of life from oblivion. As we reflect on these tales, a clearer picture emerges. The true pivot points, the moments that genuinely shifted the course of events, often happened away from the open battlefield. They unfolded in the dark of night, during a tense secret negotiation, or aboard a crowded ship fleeing a fallen city for an uncertain future. The legacy of these rescues endures not just in history books, but in the very concepts of loyalty, sacrifice, and the unyielding belief that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, no one is truly beyond saving.